The University of Texas college basketball job is open. Well, at least on the outside looking in, it is, as Chris Beard has been let go from the Texas Longhorns because of some off-the-court issues. And now it begs the question, does the Longhorn job, who does it go to? But then further after that, does the domino tip from there and really get a little wild for what could be the biggest coaching carousel we've seen in quite some time. I'm Justin Young. He's Josh Tec. We're going to talk about it right here on the Fast Break. And Josh, let's kind of get right out to the open here. Obviously, Chris Beard's on the way out. It was his dream job. He's an alum. Had some off-court issues with his live-in girlfriend that now leaves him without a job in Austin. Rodney Terry is the interim coach and doing a pretty good job so far for the Longhorns. They're in a stretch now within the Big 12, which is a pretty wild conference this year, that will really find out whether or not he can coach himself into the full-time position with the job. But really, from a big picture standpoint, man, where do we even start for this conversation?
I guess, one of the first, obviously you got to start with who's potentially, options for the job. And, really quickly before we delve into some of the, other aspects of this conversation, we should commend Rodney Terry for the job he's doing. They just led that 18-point comeback against TCU. And that's not, an TCU of old. That's a Jamie Dixon TCU. He's got that program rolling, and they're operating as one of the best teams in the country. So for Texas to be able to pull off that win is really big.
Yeah, I think maybe we start there. Let's start there with Rodney Terry, okay? He's been a head coach at two different places. He's been at Fresno State, and he's been at UTEP and had, pretty solid success at both of those spots. He knows the program really well. He's coached there at Texas before. I think the players certainly love Rodney Terry. If you ever spend any time with Rodney Terry, he's a really good dude. I think he projects the brand of Texas really, really well. When I see Rodney Terry, I still think of him as a Texas Longhorn, no matter where he is. I think of that burnt orange and Rodney Terry going head to head. So I think legitimately he has a legitimate shot of still being the head coach in next year's team and beyond that. I think that's where the athletic director, Chris Del Conte, has to start and really think about him as a contender. But I do wonder sometimes, do interim coaches really turn out to be the right decision, right? Do they just kind of become that guy? And history's shown that sometimes yes, sometimes no. But sometimes you're also the right guy at the right place at the right time. Like Chris Beard and his staff, they were building such a great program as is. And I think Rodney Terry had a lot to do with it. I think Brandon Chappelle has a lot to do with the recruiting a new guy on their staff. They've got good X's and O's on the bench too. But I don't know, like if you're building a program and if you're a fan of that program, does an interim coach turn full-time head coach get you excited?
Well, I mean, I guess if there's any place that's going to do it that's as big of a brand as Texas, I mean, that's a good place to put an interim position, because basketball isn't on the forefront. Like, going back to the Kentucky conversation or going to some of these other blue blood conversations, you can't really have an interim at Kansas. You can't really have an interim at Kentucky because basketball is the primary sport at those schools. So that wouldn't appease the fan base. But at Texas, you probably could. You could probably get away with that for a couple of years. And I was, consuming some kind of college basketball content somewhere. I can't remember who it was. It might have been the Eye on College Basketball podcast. But they brought up a really interesting point about how why not give Rodney Terry a shot for like a year? Like give him a year tag and be like, hey, we're going to give you we're going to extend your trial run, right? We'll give you X amount of dollars for a year. If it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. But we want to give you a shot. And instead of committing to a long-term thing, why don't you just commit to a short-term thing and kind of, have every party win?
I don't know. Would you want to get a job like that? Like that you're already in there and like, hey, well, listen, we're going to give you a shot. And if you don't get the shot, then you're out. Well, you already have the job. It's not your fault that the guy got fired in front of you for something that had nothing to do with basketball.
Well, I mean, if you're going to get the Texas job for like X million dollars for 1 year, as opposed to either, going down towards, like a mid-major, low major for significantly less money, or going to, be an assistant for significantly less money. Yeah, I'd probably take the Texas job for a year.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean,
right? Like, job. He's doing a good job now. So in this hypothetical situation, if he keeps this up and keeps winning, then yeah, extend him. But like, at least, maybe try and give him a shot for another year, maybe a 2-year extension or something like that.
Well, I don't know if quantifying this is the right move, but I think he's got at least a 65% shot of being the head guy there at the program.
Yeah.
I think he's justified such a thing. And to your point, like you got this, win over TCU. They've got some unbelievable games coming up down the stretch as well. I think you get a win against Kansas will certainly help your case. But we got to remember too that Texas eventually is going to move out to the SEC, so it's a bit of a different landscape as well. So, which kind of leads me to the next point in this conversation. And we talked about it yesterday on the fast break with John Calipari. And is this the end for him at Kentucky? Does he now become a player for the Texas job? Does Calipari in his relationship with Kentucky, how much do you think that impacts this Texas job?
I think
they're going to both go after the same guys too.
Candidates. I think that the heat is actually turning up on Calipari in that whole situation, and him going to Texas is actually becoming more legitimate by the day. Because at first it was like Calipari could go to Texas, and it was kind of like a long shot, dreamers kind of think. But now, given all the stuff, Kyle Tucker reported that him and Mitch Barnhart, the AD at Kentucky, haven't had the best relationship. Kentucky's fan base is, really starting to turn up the heat on Calipari, even more so than they had in the past. So I think this becoming, coming to fruition is actually becoming more real by the day.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time talking about Calipari because we did yesterday with a 30-minute show. And if you're on our YouTube channel on HoopSeen TV on YouTube, first of all, like and subscribe this video. Like this video and subscribe to our channel, but also go check out that show as well. I'll put it linked below in the description. You're gonna want to go watch that. It was a really good show that we did yesterday. So I think it begs the question then. I think there's no doubt that in the tier one line, outside of Rodney Terry getting the first shot at the gig, I think we have a first tier guys. John Calipari certainly is a guy that you've got to put on there. Before we get into some of the candidates, let's actually kind of let's get into the job itself and what does that candidate need to really portray and bring to the table to be the head coach at Texas?
Okay, yeah. I mean, you got to be able to keep kids in the state because Texas is becoming, or maybe not becoming, Texas is one of the most basketball-rich states in the country as far as prospects go. I mean, some could argue that Texas is the best state for basketball recruiting at this current state and time, especially in that Dallas area. I mean, it's loaded. You look through any kind of recruiting rankings, you see all kinds of Texas guys. So I think keeping guys in state would go a long way.
I think that's an interesting topic. I actually want to go back to that after we kind of go through the candidates, whether or not you really do need to know the state of Texas, because I don't know. I've got some thoughts on that. I think for any elite job, I do wonder if that really matters that much. Yeah. So I'm with you. I think you do. At least you've got to be able to recruit high level guys, which we certainly know, which we've seen. Chris Beard and his staff do a really good job. They got a really good one right before all this went down. They got AJ Johnson out of Southern California Academy. A 6'6" combo guard that can really entice you with what he can be down the road. He might be a one and done guy, might be a high ceiling guy. He may be, sometimes I wonder if he's Brandon Boston, and sometimes I wonder if he's maybe like old school Penny Hardaway. Is he that kind of guy? So there's some intrigue there. You've got to go. Holland. What's that?
They also got Ron Holland.
And they've got Ron Holland out of Duncanville, one of the best winners there is in the class of 2023, all over the state. Or all over the country, no question about it. So I think you've got to be able to go get those guys. But I think moreover, when you look at Texas, to me, it is one of those brands. I'm trying to think of a good parallel. I think it's in the Mercedes. I think it's in the luxury car category of college sports, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so you've got to be able to get somebody at that job that understands the brand value that goes far beyond, I think, an X's and O's coach. I think you've got to get somebody that's got a little bit more
big.
What's that?
They've got to be big. They've got to have a big personality.
Well, they've got to be able to handle it, no question about it. I mean, you've got Matthew McConaughey, for God's sake, sitting down at the end of the bench, right? There's a Hollywood element to it. Austin, Texas is becoming a really prime place for people to move to. Tech company. To me, it's one of those brands that goes far beyond the college experiences. So you've got to be able to be an ambassador for what that school's all about. So to me, I think when you put those qualifiers on there, obviously Calipari makes a ton of sense. So to that end, I take it a step further then and say, for me in my top tier, that's why I think you've got to really think differently. And really, Texas doesn't seem like a school where you've got to keep it in the family in that category. I think you've got to go out there and get a guy that can. I don't think Texas needs to be turned around per se, So I think you go big. I think you go for a guy like Bruce Pearl. I mentioned him yesterday in our Kentucky pod. I think Bruce Pearl to me is one of the most impressive guys that we have in college basketball as we move away from some of the old heads that are now retired and the guys that are going to be retiring here in the next decade. I think Bruce Pearl's got that sort of cachet that can handle that. I mean, look what the guy's done at Auburn, recruited pro after pro after pro, has turned that program from a team that was really in some peril into a real dominating factor, dominates the city of Atlanta, one of the best recruiting cities there is in college basketball. And I think he could do a stellar job at Austin.
Well, let's keep it right there for 1 second. I think that the two jobs are pretty comparable because basketball is kind of the secondary option, right? Football is the king. Both are humongous brands in the football landscape. Texas is about to go to the SEC where they're going to face off with Auburn. So I think that that's a really good spot to start because you can compare them really easily. Bruce Pearl sold that Auburn program, right? He got that fan base to buy in. And now that's one of the more intimidating arenas to go if you're, a high quality team. In Texas, that fan base does need a little bit of buy-in in terms of basketball, right? We've seen them play to empty gyms before. They got a new arena. So if you get a guy like Bruce Pearl in there to help sell that brand, I think, you could really get that place rocking.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, Auburn basketball's got some cachet to it now that it hasn't had in the 25 years I lived in the Deep South. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think Texas has that same sort of ability. It's funny. I grew up in Dallas. I'm a Texas kid. I grew up there. I lived there for 15 years. And it's funny, I'll get into that. I think that's another conversation after we get past the coaches. So on that first tier, is there another names or another coach that you think that needs to be on that first tier for this job?
In that first tier, Rodney Terry, Bruce Pearl, I think maybe he'd be in second tier, but maybe I'll just dive into that right now. But a guy that I'm really looking at is Jerome Tang.
Yeah, he's killing it, Kansas State.
He's dominating at Kansas State right now. They're fantastic. I mean, they just hung like 100 million points on Texas at Texas. So that's a good win right there. I mean, they're 15-1, I believe, in his first year. He spent a lot of time in Texas at Baylor under Scott Drew. I think he was there for like almost 20 years. So he knows the league, the Big 12. I mean, it's not, I guess they're going to move to the SEC soon, but still, he knows that area. He knows Texas. He knows what it means to win in that area. So I think that's a really viable option.
Yeah, knows really high-level guards. Yeah, no question about it. My question would be, he's only been there at Kansas State for 1 year. Is that – I don't think that matters to anybody anymore in coaching, certainly.
No.
But
I mean, Tommy Lloyd had never been a coach before, and he's crushing it at Arizona. Jerome Tang had never been a head coach before, and now he's crushing it at Kansas State. I think you just kind of go with a proven winner, and right now he seems to be, just that.
Yeah, I'm not mad at that. I like Eric Musselman also in this category too, going back into a person that can be bigger than just being a basketball coach. We've certainly seen what he's done and pumped life back into. I would argue that Arkansas is a 10 times better, well, not 10 times, but a better basketball school than Texas. I think they're more passionate about basketball there in Fayetteville. And we've seen what he's done there, and he's recruited really, really well, recruited nationally, and gotten players in. Anthony Black is a Texas guy, also considered Texas. You got to wonder, should he have gone to Texas, when in the big picture? So you got a guy like Eric Musselman, who I think could handle driving the Mercedes, you know what I mean? Being the guy that's in that position that can handle that sort of brand, that sort of expectation. And really not that, again, Chris Beard didn't do anything within the program to really hurt the program. They just need a new guy to lead the program. And I think Eric Musselman certainly is a guy that can also step right in. It won't be too big. And we talked about yesterday on the Kentucky pod, where his history has shown that he doesn't stay at a place too terribly long, which would make me think that if a job like Texas comes about, that he'd probably be able to jump it. The only difference is with Arkansas, I think they would match. I think they got enough money up there that they would be able to match that. Any other guys that's in this category for you? It can be tier 1, tier 2, whatever.
Yeah. So when you brought up Eric Musselman, I think he's got to be a guy that any of the biggest programs in the sport, go after. And I think another one of those guys is Nate Oates at Alabama. He is emerging as the next, if Kentucky opens, you got to call Nate Oates. If, any of the highest tier programs open, Nate Oates, Eric Musselman are on the top of your list. So I think Nate Oates is definitely a guy that Texas should consider. He can recruit. He can win. He can handle a program of that magnitude. I mean, he's also turned around a football school, right? Alabama's, becoming a perennial winner. And, for a while, basketball was an afterthought there. So I think, succeeding at a football school is something that he doesn't struggle with.
Well, pros too, man. The guys can begin pros,
Yeah,
developing
he recruits
pros.
at a high level, and he
Yeah,
develops guys at a high level too, right? Like, it's not just like, getting the 5-star one and dones. He, can get a high level kid, keep him around for a couple of years, and then send him off to the pros. So there's that you can sell as well.
yeah, I'm with you. I'm really impressed by him. I think Dennis Gates at Mizzou is also a guy that we've got to consider. I think he's going to be a name that we hear quite a bit. Anytime there's a high level job that opens up, I think he's going to be a guy that we have in conversation. Killed it at Cleveland State. He's got some history there at Florida State, and now really building a really good program. Also, a program, Mizzou, that loves their basketball. There's some history there. There's a ton of money in that program. As a guy that I think is in a really good situation, very similar to what Muss is at Arkansas when he first started that job. So I'd be curious to see, does Dennis Gates become a guy that a place like Texas or even in Kentucky or some of these other high-level jobs as they start to pop open, assuming that Kentucky job pops open, does Dennis Gates come in there and become a guy? I think he's just 41, 42, young guy.
Yeah.
And I think will be really, really good. Recruits all over the country. And I think is really well received by just darn near anybody. So I'm a huge Dennis Gates guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's crushing it right now. I think that's a great option. He's also emerging on that list of the Jerome Tangs, Dennis Gates, Eric Musselmans, all those guys where it's like, your job opens, you're a high-level basketball program, basketball first. These are the guys you consider. And Dennis Gates is, slowly starting to emerge on that list.
Do you have an X factor? You have a secret name?
I do. I want to hear yours first, because before we started recording, you said you had one, and I want to know if we're on the same page there. And then I do have a funny one to bring up. So
Okay.
why don't you go ahead first?
Okay. Well, again, I think when you have a job that opens up mid-season, you kind of got to really think outside the box a little bit. And so I think sometimes getting guys collegiately and kind of thinking about that, you're kind of in your own zone. But I think anybody, when we talk about staying in the family, I don't think Texas is the place. However, I do think there is maybe one exception in Royale Ivey, who's with the Brooklyn Nets. He's been an assistant coach at the G League level, the NBA level since 2014 with Oklahoma City, with the Nets or with the Knicks, and now at the Nets. And now before KD, another Texas guy, went down. I always thought that the Nets have a really good shot to really make a run. They're playing unbelievable. And Royale Ivey is a guy that's got some real good experience and coached with some really good guys and is well loved in Austin. Would be a guy. Was that your name, by the way?
No, my name's a little bit different. My name's, in the college basketball sphere. It might not be like the sexiest name that Texas fans go crazy over, but I think people like us would really applaud the hire. And that's Grant McCaslin over at North Texas.
Okay. Yeah.
He's in the area. He's built the Mean Green into a perennial winner. I mean, they upset Purdue a couple years ago in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
They're always winning. I think he would be a really great fit at Texas. He's from the area. He knows the area. So I think all of the boxes are checked there. I think that's one. But I have a really, really sneaky one off the list.
Okay, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
A guy who's got familiarity with Texas, to say the least. And he's got another big-time winner right now that always, since he's taken over, has been a really successful program and operating at the top of the SEC, the league that Texas is going into, and that's Rick Barnes. Can we get the marriage back together?
The return?
He looks good in orange. We already know that.
I don't know, man. I feel like that chapter has got a lock on it. I think he's.
I do too, but it's just when you're thinking of guys who are winning right now, who have their teams operating at the highest of levels, Rick Barnes is doing a pretty damn good job, and there's familiarity there. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes you don't need to make a remake of a movie or.
No, I agree. As a movie guy, I definitely agree there.
I like the outside the box. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I would much rather bank on Royale Ivey than I think I would Rick Barnes movie.
Yeah, you just gotta kind of throw out and see what sticks, right?
I'm not mad at it. at it. Well, I think it does lead us into our next point that I do want to bring up. And my question was, with Texas, do you really need to know Texas? Do you really have to have deep recruiting ties to the state of Texas? You said it right. It is, to me, one of the top three, if not top two states there is in the country. I think California's in there. I think Georgia's in there. I think the DC area. I think the Philadelphia, New Jersey area, to me, is one of those areas. But there's no denying that Texas is a fertile hotbed, in large part because of just the sheer geographic size of the state. But my question is, do you really have to know Texas, the state of Texas, to be a major candidate for the University of Texas's job?
No, I don't think so. The reason I say that is because it's Texas. Like in Texas, Texas is everything, right? It's like if you were to go coach at Kentucky, you wouldn't have to know the state of Kentucky, in my opinion. Everybody wants to go to Kentucky. In Texas, everybody wants to go to Texas. You know, in Tennessee, everybody wants to go to Tennessee. In Georgia, everybody wants to go to Georgia. It's like it's one of those big brands that everybody, dreams of if you grow up in that area. But I don't think it hurts. Like obviously having the relationships with coaches from that area will never hurt you. But I don't think you have to know the area, like, be a deep Texas head to know, be successful.
I think for the Texas job, you've got to be able to go get guys wherever they are. Like I'm watching the Georgia TCU national championship game, and Bowers, their tight end, who's unbelievable, right? He's a sophomore, freshman. I don't know, he's Superman. He's from Napa, California. Okay, he's from Napa, California, and he's starting and playing a huge role for Georgia, right? It's like those two things don't go hand in hand. Like the old Georgia days, you would have thought that their tight end would have been from some small town in South Georgia or something like that. But national brands, I think they have to lean into their national. I think Texas is one of those. If there's a great player in Detroit, Michigan, go get him. If there's a great guy that plays on team final out of Philadelphia, go get him. If there's a guy out of Seattle that's playing for Rotary and slaying it, go get him. And I think Texas is one of those schools that, like, no doubt, it doesn't hurt you to have great ties in Texas, and you probably need to have half of your roster be Lone Star State dudes, no question about it. But you need to be able to go out there and get anybody because of your brand. And if you want to portray your brand as a brand that is the Mercedes driving down the road, then you need to be able to drive that car wherever you need to go to and go get a guy. So I'm not always sold that you've got to be a Texas guy or you need to know the state of Texas to go out there and get it, which then begs the question to me, is Texas even that good of a job that we really think that it is? You said something that's interesting that, if you're from Georgia, you want to go to the University of Georgia. If you're from Tennessee, you want to go to the University of Tennessee, and you go down the line. Let me use a parallel here. So when I moved out to Phoenix, I used to always think that University of Arizona was where everybody wanted to go. That's not the case. In Metro Phoenix, everybody wants to go to Arizona State. But as an outsider coming in, I didn't know that. Now, I grew up in Dallas. Okay, now this was a long time ago, right? This is still when like TVs had knobs and they didn't have digital remotes and stuff like that. So it was forever ago. But like all my friends, they wanted to go to Texas Tech and they wanted to go to TCU. Okay, and we lived in the Dallas area. And Texas was never really like the school that anybody ever really talked about. Like a very few, small number of people went to Texas. Now, again, where I grew up, I grew up in the suburbs of Dallas, so it wasn't like super crazy.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, like, is Texas is as good as we think that it is, and is Texas a school that guys have always wanted to go to? Because if you look back, and we talked about this yesterday, Calipari went to the state of Texas and just started taking dudes all the time out of Texas.
Yeah, I think maybe we're talking about a little bit of different things here. Yeah, I grew up in Louisville. A lot of kids wanted to go to Louisville, from that area. But as far as athletics go, if Kentucky comes calling, you're probably going to go to Kentucky, right? In that situation. And as far as athletics go, Arizona is the bigger brand than Arizona State. You know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of kids recognize those and want to go there. Like local, high school kids, regular Joes like me and you, we want to go to wherever, we just want to go to whatever school. But I think a lot of these like high profile athletes, they want to go to the biggest brands within their state.
But if Texas's brand was as big as it is, Anthony Black wouldn't be playing it in Arkansas.
I don't think you can argue that Texas isn't one of the biggest brands in the sport, in college sports. I think part of that has to do with.
But is it though? That's my question. But is it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Texas. Like Texas is, one of the most recognizable brands in the sport. What makes you think that it isn't?
Okay, so tell me the one player not named Kevin Durant from the University of Texas in the NBA that's killing it.
Well,
exactly.
I can't think of one off the top of my head, but why don't you make your case against Texas?
Well, I think I am. I am. And so, like, to me, like, but that's why I wonder, is it really as good as we think that it is? Now, their new arena is phenomenal, right? Like, it is an absolute just beautiful thing.
I think it is. I mean, I just think the money and the resources and the fan base and just like everybody, when you see burnt orange, you think of Texas. I think it is as big of a brand as we all perceive it to be.
I think it could be, and I think that's where it goes.
And I think where we're getting conflated here is if we're talking about as just a basketball brand, it might not be, but as just the brand of Texas, yeah, it's humongous.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that Texas A&M, when Buzz got the job, was getting better players. And then Texas Tech for a time were getting better players when Beard was there. And even TCU, for that matter, is having a bit of a surge. Houston, obviously, the number one team in the country. We haven't talked about them. Well,
Texas has always been getting the 5-star guys. They just haven't won at the level that some of those other guys, have, right? I mean, they've always gotten the 5-star. When Shaka Smart was there, he had always had a 5-star big man that went off to the NBA, right? Like one and done kind of guy. But they just didn't have that level of success that some of these other programs have had, right? Chris Beard at Texas Tech killed it. Jamie Dixon at TCU has been killing it. Kelvin Sampson at Houston has been killing it. But Shaka Smart really worked out at Texas. They had that 1 year, of Chris Beard where he was kind of rebuilding, and now Chris Beard was, turning it into what it could be. But then now we're in that tumultuous situation that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, Baylor won a national championship, for goodness sakes. You know what I mean?
Like I said, I think the brand is still big. I mean, they were still recruiting at a high level. I mean, they were recruiting the best players. They just didn't win at the level that some of these other programs in their area did won at.
Okay, so if Calipari gets this job, do they become a national contender, like right out of the gate?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think when Calipari took the Kentucky job, he brought all of those recruits with him from Memphis, right? A lot like John Wall was committed to Memphis. He brought John Wall with him, and players like that. And I think if he gets this job, he brings at least 3 of the guys on that class with him to Texas, and that's not a hard sell because Texas is Texas, and they're a big Nike school, right? So whatever benefits they would get at Kentucky, they would also get at Texas. So I think Calipari brings guys with him. I think he keeps guys like Ron Holland and AJ Johnson with, on that, recruiting class. So I think, he succeeds at a high level there, pretty quickly.
Well, I think as we wrap it up here, I think that's the question that was asked of Chris Beard when he was offered the job. Can we go win a national championship? The answer was yes. I think that
Texas can easily win a national championship. Yeah.
That to me has to be it as they go through this search and try to figure out who's going to be the lead guy. Obviously, the ball's in Rodney Terry's court right now as the interim guy, but I think that question has to be asked no matter who your candidate is. Can we be in a position to go out there, recruit, and have a national championship contending team year in and year out at the University of Texas? If the brand really is as good as we think that it is, they need to be in that position. So that's where I think it becomes interesting. I'm sure people have tons of comments. If they do, leave them below. Make sure they're all positive and nice and things that my mother would like to read. All the negative stuff, you can send that to Josh on Twitter. Can you handle that? Are you good with that?
Yeah, I can handle that more than you thinking that Texas is not a good job.
Well, I don't know. Hold on. I don't want to end thinking that it isn't a good job. I at least just wanted to have the dialogue to make sure that we understood that it is a good job, because history said, you're right, they've had great players, but is it really that good? Right? Like, why aren't guys going there? We've got decades of seasons, huh?
Guys are going there.
No, they're not. They're going to Kentucky. They're going to Arkansas. They're going to all these other places.
Well, they still get 5-star guys all the time. Like we just brought it up. They have 2 5-star guys in the roster.
They don't have 5-star wins.
That's true. That's what I was saying is like they haven't won at that same level, but they keep getting the guys.
Okay, fair. I got you. Well, nevertheless, certainly a big talking point and a good debate to be had, no doubt about it. So love to hear what people think. Leave those comments below. Make sure you subscribe to HoopSeen TV right here on YouTube, and we'll be back again on the Fast Break. It'll be interesting to see, Josh, if the coaching carousel really starts popping off. We may be doing more of these conversations at a regular pace here in the next couple of months. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate it, Josh.